Hello, my name is Kurt Palmer, and this is my interpersonal communication project for Human Services 508 at Liberty University. Next slide. I will be talking about what is communication, discuss what is enlarging the conversation, what are my overarching goals, discuss my behavioral blend, potential barriers, what is noise pollution, as well as identifying some solutions, and my plan of action. Next slide. According to John Stewart, communication is a continuous, complex, collaborative process of verbal and nonverbal meaning making. He also describes interpersonal communication as the type or kind of communication that happens when people involved talk and listen in ways that maximize the presence of the personal. Next slide. He also uses the metaphor for inhaling and exhaling to describe the process of communication. The description of inhaling refers to breathing in or listening into the conversation, while exhaling is breathing out or talking or adding information to the conversation. He believes that both are equally important and that you can't do one without the other. Next slide. Enlarging the conversation. To me, enlarging the conversation means that we must understand what our communication skills are and use those skills to enhance the conversation to a deeper level. To do this, you have to know what your weaknesses and your strengths are in a conversation, and by understanding those strengths and weaknesses, you'll be able to better communicate with others. Next slide. Enlarging the conversation is also a cognitive process. According to the Oregon Intervention Systems, people can fall into one of four categories for cognitive processing: high reception and high responsiveness, high reception and low responsiveness, low reception, high responsiveness, and low reception, low responsiveness. What this basically means is that some people are more skilled in some areas than others. The ideal for everyone is to be a high reception and high responsive. High reception would be being able to listen and take in the information in the surrounding environment around you. High responsive would be able to apply information that you have or talk or be able to communicate that information back to the other people in the conversation. And then obviously the opposite, the low responsive and low reception, would be the inability to do those. So the ideal for everyone is to be in a high receptive person as well as a high response, being able to listen effectively and take the information that is being given, as well as being able to respond effectively. Next slide. Overarching goals. My overarching goal is to improve my listening skills by staying focused on the conversation and reducing noise pollution. I want to be able to listen without agreeing, disagreeing, advising, or defending, which is described in Peterson's text. Next slide. My behavioral blend, according to the uniquelyu.com test, showed that my behavioral blend is an SC category of what is expected to me, as well as an SC category of this is me. What this means is I tend to think people expect me to be submissive and competent. I tend to be fairly balanced and task or skills oriented, although I do tend to become more passive as opposed to active. I tend to be steady and stable emotionally, and I have a reserved leadership style. I have found this to be fairly true, a fairly accurate description of my personality. There were some dissimilarities from what I read, but even the text itself says that it was not intended to be 100% accurate, just a generalized area, and for the most part, I agreed with what it had to say. Next slide. Behavioral blend and how it affects my listening positively. Positive aspects of being an SC behavioral blend is that I'm not an assertive person or bossy. I tend to care about others, and I tend to be good in conversations with individuals in small groups, which again does describe me fairly well. Next slide. Behavioral blend and how it affects my listening negatively. People tend to see me as passive as opposed to being active, which can lead people to tend to think that I'm not interested or I don't care. I tend to do too much researching, which means before I get involved in a conversation, I like to know all about the conversation, so I tend to research much more than I actually need to in order to be competent on a conversation before sometimes I will enter the conversation. I don't tend to be decisive, which means in some cases I will tend to go with the more direct person's approach, even if I don't necessarily intend to agree with it. Which also goes to the last one, that I tend to easily be influenced when people appeal to my logical or soft side, which means as long as somebody's not breathing down my neck or getting rather upset at me, I will be much more inclined to agree with what they have to say. Next slide. Potential barriers. The first potential barrier that I have is the flat brain syndrome, which is letting emotions take control and leaving my mind little room to think. This is something that everybody has to face at some point or another, where they tend to become emotionally attached or involved around a certain subject, and when they do that, they begin to escalate their emotions, and when they do that, they think less clearly. To address this issue, I will use the talker-listener cards out of the Peterson text and practice with my family. Another issue is perception. Perception is what the mind perceives, and my issue with this is that sometimes since I do so much research and I tend to focus on things, I tend to think that people are thinking certain or saying certain things that they're not talking about, and I miss the meaning of the conversation. To help eliminate this problem, I'm going to focus and eliminate the distractions and focus on the topic. Reception is what the mind interprets. So that would be where I listen to a conversation and I don't understand what the actual person is trying to say. The words he is using, the body language he's using is confusing me to think he's meaning something else than what he's actually saying. To address this, I will paraphrase to make sure that I understand what the talker is saying. So I will repeat back in my own words what I believe he is saying. Next slide. Noise pollution. Noise pollution in general is anything that distracts the listener from the conversation. Noise pollution internal is being distracted by your own ideas or your own thoughts, or basically you yourself getting in the way of you being able to listen to what the conversation is actually saying. To address this, I will ask the talker to clarify what he is saying. I will avoid trying to think of answers prior to the talker finishing what he has to say. So in other words, I won't be trying to think of a response while I'm trying to listen at the same time. Next slide. Noise pollution external. External noise pollutions are things that distract the listener from listening. In this sense, an external example would be something like a cell phone or a car, a TV, something along that lines. My solution for this would be to just simply set the stage for listening by eliminating distractions, particularly ones that I know that distract me fairly well, such as television or radio, and create a setting for a definite purpose of listening. Next slide. My plan of action for my overarching goals. My plan of action is first and foremost to remember what communication is and not view it as a competition. I do tend to sometimes, especially when I'm wrapped up or I'm fairly emotional about a subject, become very competitive about that subject. I need to remember that communication is not a competition, but a matter of exchanging information. The second thing I will do is keep in mind my goals, keeping them fresh in my mind to remind myself that when I am getting into certain situations where I'm not listening or communicating effectively, I will remember that I need to eliminate my own competitions for my attention, such as noise. I need to stay focused on the listener, not try to focus on responses, that type of stuff. I need to be more aware of my behavioral blend and how it impacts my communication skills. I do need to realize that I am an SC personality type, which means that I do tend to overanalyze things. I do tend to stay out of conversations when I don't feel confident in them. I need to be aware of that so that I can address those. I need to learn to avoid noise pollutions that are disrupting me from giving the talker my full attention, such as TVs, other things that distract it, or, thinking of answers, that type of stuff. Next slide. That's all I have. Thank you very much.